My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hello and welcome to The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40. Created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster, Sam Baker. You might think you know all there is to know about today's guest. Posh girl who once dated Princess Margaret's son, half of the early noughties style duo Trinny and Susannah, plus a short-lived and strangely identifiable turn on Strictly. Susannah Constantine is a novelist, a writer, a broadcaster with over 25 years experience. She's a hit podcaster, My Wardrobe Malfunction is an absolute hoot, and on the cusp of 60, Susannah has just written a game-changing memoir that will make you think more than twice about what it really means to be a girl who's brought up in privilege.
I would say it's more pathos than being upsetting. And that's genuinely how I am, because I choose not to look back. I don't blame my parents for anything. I just choose to look at all the positive things they gave me, of which there were so many. And
Susannah joined me from her swanky kitchen to talk extremely candidly about hitting rock bottom before she could confront her alcoholism, her complicated relationship with her mother, rediscovering her identity after it was ripped away, and how she experienced a mental menopause. Plus, there's Strictly humiliation, Dolph Lundgren, and having tea with the Queen.
Your podcast is so great. You are so good. I'm not just saying that. Once I started, I didn't want to stop, actually.
Oh, excellent.
No,
That's
it's
music
really,
to my ears.
Really great. Really great. You're very good at interviewing.
Well, I have got Kristen Scott Thomas envy, I have to say.
I know, she was amazing.
Well done getting her. Who are the babies behind your head? Random babies or your babies?
No, that's Joe, my son. My eldest child.
Very cute.
They're great, aren't they? They're actually taken by, Robert Mapplethorpe, photographer.
Yeah.
By his younger brother who worked with him, Edward Mapplethorpe. And he took them.
They are gorgeous.
Boyfriend of mine, so
yeah. Useful ex-boyfriend.
On
the subject of which, Susannah.
Yes.
Dolph Lundgren, what were you thinking?
I mean, that, just his name, let's be honest, is pure comedy, isn't it? Really. And to be honest, he pursued me and I was flattered. So it's my ego took over.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I mean, sorry, Dolph, but, what a ridiculous individial, really. But very, very smart, very, very smart.
Are you backtracking rapidly now here?
A little bit, that's the only person who I had can only be termed as a fling that I am mortified about. And it's not one that up until writing my book, Ready for Absolutely Nothing, that I
love how you got that plug in, like really nicely done that.
I know, it was rather nice, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's very slick. That's probably the second most humiliating episode in my life after Strictly.
Oh, but Strictly wasn't humiliating. Strictly made us love you.
No, you just, all you were thinking is, thank God I'm not Susannah. Thank God I'm not Susannah. Be honest.
That is true. That is true.
Exactly.
Because I think that, we all love Strictly. It's one of the few, I'm such a snob. It's one of the few of those things that I watch. And I love it. I mean, I love it. I'm obsessed with it. And I think everybody's got a little bit in them that thinks I could do Strictly and I could be turned into somebody who could dance. It's like, I can't sing. I'm tone deaf. I've got no sense of rhythm.
It was, without question, the most humiliating, most terrifying thing I've ever done. And I don't know if you ever feel like this, Sam, but it's if you're doing something out of your comfort zone and there's one person who you think might be worse than you, it's very encouraging and you can get through it. But when you realize that you are so way down, far below everybody else. It's like, you just think, well, what's the point? I am literally going out to humiliate myself. It's not even, maybe I'll do the comedy thing. Maybe I'll, sort of Anne Widdecombe character. I was too frightened to do any of that. And it was hideous. But the people were genuinely amazing. All the pro dancers, and Anton has become a dear friend, and Stacey Dooley is another person who's become a dear friend. And so from that perspective, it was amazing. It was like this incredible family. And to watch this whole iconic show come to life was a real privilege.
Basically, to paraphrase what you said, it would be okay if you could do an Anne Widdecombe and be the funny one. But is that how you've kind of navigated your life?
No, not at all. I think it's more about the opening gambit. When I meet someone new, it's the opening gambit to say something outrageous, to break the ice and to somehow be memorable. Yeah. And especially if it's with someone who I admire. But no, I don't play that card. I know I can be funny if I need to be, but it's not forced. That's sort of natural. I think maybe I kind of rely more on being, the sort of teddy bear that can sometimes maul you, is probably how I would best describe myself.
That's a brilliant description. I finished the book yesterday and I did absolutely love it. I know you've listened to some episodes and you probably think she says that to everybody. I mean, I was howling with laughter, particularly about Dolph, but also it's many things, but actually it's also really revealing and painful. Did you expect that when you started writing it?
I didn't find it painful to write at all. I didn't find it cathartic. It didn't end up being the book I started out to write, that's for sure. And, I went public about being an alcoholic during lockdown because there were so many women suffering. And I thought, okay, let's put my hand up and say, I'm there, I'm with you. You're not alone. We're all in this together. People who drink too much, particularly women. And then I got contacted by various publishers. Would I write a book about it? And it got me thinking about my life. And initially I was thinking, there's so much for Trinny and I when we were together and what not to wear. And then what I realized is, you'll know because it's in the blurb, but that part of my life, which was so much in the public eye, is actually the least interesting thing about my life. So it wasn't so much painful. It was more a daily barrage of realizations. It was like, oh my God, that's why. It was kind of a bit like an expedition into who I am, without sounding self-indulgent, because I do go into anecdotes that are very personal, but then I kind of chuck them away from myself. So it'll be something about me, and then I'll go off in another direction and on a tangent, which you think there is no connection to whatsoever to the anecdote, but actually there is. So, it was really interesting. And I learned so much about myself and about how much we all have in common. All have in common. And there are these extraordinary anecdotes, but they reveal ordinary truths that we all experience. So yes, maybe I gave Dolph a blowjob, and it was a bit more than that actually, but I gave him a blowjob and then went out with him for 6 weeks or something, went out, and then 10 years later he didn't recognize me. Okay, well we've all been there. Come on, Sam, you've been there. And
I'm sorry, my mum's listening to this probably.
Yeah. Hi, Mum. And so probably, we've all been there, but it just happened to be with Dolph Lundgren, which made it extraordinary. So although there's a very clear narrative going through the book, it is these kind of mad, crazy anecdotes where I look back and I think, my God, I'm Forrest Gump. My life has been like Forrest Gump's.
It's really interesting you say that, because I've actually written that down, that even though, your experience, it would seem extreme in some cases, and obviously you had a very different privileged, I'm making like inverted commas marks.
No, but I did. I did have a privilege. Yeah.
But it's so identifiable. Like when you say, it's like literally you did have me at page 1, like when you say about, it's an anecdote about a rather ordinary woman who threw herself at at the feet of a man in whose opinion she had absolutely no interest. I mean, yeah, who hasn't done that? And gone out with someone because they were flattered to be asked.
Exactly. And that's what it was. Like I just said previously, he chased me. And so I let him in, literally. Legs spread, let him in.
I mean, you are really clear-eyed about your upbringing and what you were brought up for, and kind of, brutal, actually, about your education and the fact that you were brought up to be capable of absolutely nothing apart from being a wife. At what point, because you talk about the patriarchy and initially not knowing what it was and then not even thinking to question it, and your mother being like basically trapped in the center of it. When did you start to kind of think about all this stuff and get a handle on it?
When I wrote this book.
When you wrote the book, not before?
Not before. I think my form of rebellion, I was too kind of conditioned and too timid as a person to rebel in a traditional way of, sex, drugs and rock and roll. But I think my form of rebellion was working, because it wasn't what I was expected to do. And I found that I got so much out of having a purpose. And again, in writing this book, I was thinking, where did this come from? And it came from looking after my animals. It came from working in the stable yard with this amazing homosexual, alcoholic, manic depressive man, Mick Toulson, who I adored, and he would make me work. And I loved that so much. So I think that's where my rebellion went. And I didn't realize that, and like I said, until writing this book, and then just thinking about my dad. I could have gone to university, despite a really shit education where we were being molded to become our mothers. I could have gone to university, but I remember my father so clearly saying to me, darling, don't be silly. You'd be much better off learning how to make a good beef Wellington, quote unquote. And, at the time I didn't think anything of it, but I look back now and it's like, Jesus, wow.
Yeah, like you say, your dad was really successful and talented businessman. And obviously you're part of both of your parents. So even if your mother had been happy being a wife, which she clearly wasn't, you still got an enormous part of your dad in you. And the fact that it didn't even occur to him to transfer any of his skills, to encourage any, what was the 60s and 70s? I know things have changed exponentially since then.
Yeah.
But it's crazy.
It is crazy. But I think part of it with my dad was that he wasn't, in the truest sense, an aristocrat. Yes, we were wealthy and we had everything we could want, not in terms of, luxury or, but we were warm, we were fed, we were looked after. But I think for him, he was very much part of the mercantile class. And I think he just wanted his daughters to replicate the path of the true aristocrat. I think that's what it was. But it's funny, like when he died, my dad, and I love my dad and I had so much respect for him because he had a brilliant mind. He was so artistic and had an amazing eye. He was a true aesthetic. But when he died, I found under his bed a whole box of every cutting, everything I'd written, every newspaper. But, he didn't think to articulate that. And, that was very much part of that kind of just post-Victorian upbringing. So,
yeah,
there we go.
When was your dad born?
I don't know exactly. Probably about 1930, I think, maybe a bit before.
Yeah, so I think also like blokes of that age of all classes weren't exactly demonstrative, were they, I suppose? But yeah, the book, as obviously your life was dominated by your parents and their marriage. Can you tell us a bit more about the setup?
Their relationship. It was a very codependent marriage, but not in equal parts. So for my dad, my mum was very, very beautiful. And she was the sweetest, kindest, most gentle, loving human being you could ever wish to to meet. But for my dad, she was his greatest trophy. He loved collecting beautiful things, and she was his greatest acquisition. So I really don't think he ever regarded her, how she was feeling, or questioned it. But that's the only way he could love her. It would be by giving her things. But at the same time, having her at his side made him feel more significant individual, to have this beautiful wife. It was something, as a businessman, it was important to have at that time in the sector he was in business, kind of highfalutin business at that time. And my mother was basically his unpaid PA. She did everything for him, and every day he'd give her a list of things to do. So without that, she would really have had nothing at all. She had her children. I had a much closer relationship with her than my sister.
Your sister's older, isn't she?
Yeah, she's 6 years older. But my that was her purpose in life. That was her purpose. And if she'd been in a different marriage, I don't know whether things would have turned out another way for her, because her illness, being bipolar, overruled everything. It was just so all-consuming. I mean, it didn't really manifest itself severely until I was about 15. But she couldn't function. She could not function.
What do you think? I mean, it's impossible to say really, but what do you think came first, the alcoholism or the bipolarness?
I think depression and bipolar. And then I think she started self-medication, because you think about then, so let's say my sister remembers more being older, and she remembers the kind of lies. And she said my mum was a pathological liar, but it was to get herself out of trouble. So she was really frightened of confrontation. So it's much easier to lie, or to go along, go with the flow, or be in agreement. But 25 years ago, she would have been like Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre. She would have been locked away in the attic. She would have been sent to an asylum. And things hadn't moved on so much in the kind of 70s. It was all about, you just throw pills at them. My mother didn't have one therapy session, not one, as far as I can remember.
Pills were really stigmatized, weren't they? Even like 10 years ago, let alone then.
Yeah. And so my father, as I write, was in complete denial. And my sister was angry, and I just learned to cope. But, I choose not to look at it as a negative thing, having a mother like that, because it was, I believe, beneficial in a few ways. It gave me strength, but I think most importantly, it taught me the ability to live in the moment. Because, which I do, I never look back, ever. That's why writing this book was such a surprise to me. I never look back. I don't look forward to the point of being irresponsible. I just live now. And I think that's because that's all I had as a child, was the moment I was in. So I didn't know how my mom was going to be the next day. I didn't know what was going to happen the next day. I didn't know she was going to, try and commit suicide, or whether she'd be on a high or a low. So it gave me the ability to, like I said, be totally present. And that's a gift. That's a real gift to have that.
But did it also make you kind of hyper alert?
Yes.
So you're in the present to the extent that you're like, what's going to happen now?
Yes. I mean, I'm sure that's where a lot of, I suffer from anxiety, and I'm sure it stems from that. But also, on the flip side, I became an observer. And to be an observer is, I believe, hugely important as a writer.
To go back to your mum and your childhood, did it also turn you into the family fixer? The coper, the watcher.
No.
I think you use the word watcher, don't you?
I was definitely the watcher, but I wasn't the fixer. That was my sister. She was the fixer, and she was. Although we weren't close until much later on because of the age gap, but then there was also, we had this wonderful housekeeper, Mrs. A, who was like my surrogate mother. She has been the most important person in my life. She sadly died last year, but without her, I don't think I would have had the stability that I did. She was an extraordinary woman, and loving and firm and always there, constant. So she took away a lot of that feeling the need to have responsibility as a child. She took that away. And then my sister was, she was the angry one. She could vocalize what she was seeing, whereas I'd internalize what I was seeing.
How much do you think that what you watched and the way that your parents interacted, so your mum kind of, I suppose, endlessly trying not to disappoint your dad, but being desperately unhappy, how much did you think that impacted on your adult relationship?
A lot. I don't think my mum was always unhappy. She was unhappy not so much in her marriage. She loved my father very much. It was that her illness that made her unhappy. And yes, my father was a control freak or whatever, but because of her, I'm a terrible people pleaser. I'm always trying to keep the status quo. I'm terrified of confrontation. I couldn't give a fuck about people outside, and I will fight till the end with people I don't know. But the more I love someone, the less able I am to do that. So yeah, I am in many ways like my mother in my marriage. I'm always trying to please and make sure everything's okay. And, I need to man up and just get my own bus and get on with it.
Woman up.
Yeah, woman up, yeah.
Do you think that contributed to your own alcoholism?
I don't know, Sam. I mean, I really looked at that. I think it's genetic for sure. I think it's a disease that's genetic. And I don't think it did. I think this is another realization in the book. It's like when we went to Mick Toulson's, this guy who had the stable yard, he was an alcoholic like my mum. But when my mum was there and she had a glass of whiskey in her hand, which she never drank apart from when she was down at the stable yard, she was so happy. She was so happy there. And not just because she was pissed, but she could be herself and she was free and she could drink without being watched. And then Mick was, a complete raging alcoholic, and he's fucking hilarious, but he was the most brilliant horseman. Amazing rider. He could get on any horse and be able to sit without getting dragged along the ground or, without falling. And there were two alcoholics who were, my mum was loving and warm and kind, and there she was happy. And there was Mick, who was, kind of a highly functioning alcoholic. And I think that had quite an impact. And, when I started drinking alcoholically, I was functioning really fucking well. I was holding the family together. I was, I had a career, but I was dying inside because it was all an act. It was a 24-hour performance I was giving.
When was it? Was it the Trinny and Susannah years, or was it after?
It was towards the end of the Trinny and Susannah years. So not in this country, but we were filming all over the world. And it was, I think it was in Sweden.
You and Swedes, obviously.
I know, hello, the Scandies. And yeah, I was, it was bad. It was bad then. And Trinny, being in recovery herself, was, she knew how to handle it. And she knew that there was nothing she could say. And I had to come to the realization myself, but she was like my safety net. I mean, I dread to think what would have happened without her. And my husband was the same too. He had the wisdom just to give me the rope to hang myself. And, so both Trinny and Steen, I have so much to thank them for being hands off, not trying to intervene or, so now I'm, making daily amends to my children, to my family, my husband, to Trin. I mean, it is what it is.
It's 9 years ago now, isn't it, since you...
Yeah, a bit more.
Stopped.
Yeah, I mean, I first went to an AA meeting, and I think just over 10 years ago. In fact, I'd been before with Trinny. I'd been to one, and I didn't get it, so I knew that this was somewhere that perhaps is where I should be. But it didn't resonate, and I obviously wasn't ready. So I haven't picked up a drink for 7 years, but I did have 2 spectacular relapses, which were amazing. Had so much fun. Not for everybody else, but I loved it. And I don't miss it at all. And it's, it helps in so many other areas of life, and not just for me, but for friends, for my children. The principles of AA are so valuable in everyday life.
In the book, you describe Cece as your watcher, which is a really poignant moment. Cece, your daughter. Were you worried about history repeating itself?
Didn't even cross my mind.
Think about it.
I didn't, and that's a terrible admission. But you say, you mentioned earlier about painful writing it. That was the most that was painful, that part, thinking about what I did in particular to Cece, because she was at home the most. And I can't. Well, then I know how she felt. I know what it was like for her, because I felt the same. And yet I carried on. It was like the selfishness of being an alcoholic is beyond anything. That is the most important thing, is not your family. It's not your children. It's not your house. It's where the next drink is coming from. I mean, the only thing I think I never took my eye off was safety. Was safety for the kids, safety for the house, keeping people safe. But I didn't give it a second thought.
What was it that got you through the door of that AA session?
Well, I hit rock bottom, and the time I was in Cornwall with my family and Steen's Australian family. The Aussies are notoriously big drinkers. No one was drinking any more than I was, but it was affecting me more because basically my sponge was saturated, and I blacked out, fell over, broke 2 transverse processes in my back, and pissed myself in front of my children. And Steen's brother-in-law, who I sort of vaguely remember helping me up, and Steen helping me up. And then I was in so much pain, both emotionally and physically. And the next day, woke up the next morning and everyone was having breakfast. And I just said, I've been lying to you. I'm drinking secretly. I'm an alcoholic and I need help. And then I asked them all, how has this affected you? I need to know how this has affected you. I know it's been awful for you. And they all had their, Joe was like, my son, he was like, oh, Mum, it's fine. And my daughter, Esme, she was like, oh, Mum, you can be a bit embarrassing sometimes. And Cece just went, she was very quiet. And she said, yeah, Mum, you need help. And Steen said nothing. And then I called a friend of mine in America, John Barrett, who's a very good friend of Trinny's as well. I actually met through Trinny, and I called him up, and then got back to Sussex the next day and walked into a meeting, and that was it. And it was just like the relief. I mean, if you're lucky, you walk in and you get it, and it's like coming home. But this book is not it's not a misery memoir at all. It's very funny, and it's not just about alcohol. But I do think. But I'm glad that more and more people are talking about it now, because it is, especially if you're functioning, it's a very isolating place to be. And there is a huge amount of comfort to be had in knowing you're not alone. And that's what going to AA meetings does. You are not alone. You're not different. You're not special. You're not, we are all the same. We have a disease. And part of that is disease by drinking too much and putting alcohol over and above everything else. And the shame and all that comes with it. And it's just, it's like anything, the relief of knowing you're not alone and there are other people feeling the same way you do is transformative.
Like you say, the book is actually really funny. And when I finished it, I emailed your PR and said, oh my God, it's bloody funny. And then afterwards I thought, was that really inappropriate? Because there is actually lots of other stuff. But the overriding impression was that I was mainly howling with laughter.
It is that. And I think, yes, there are, like with my mother's illness, looking at that, I mentioned Bertha Mason in Jane Eyre. And
it's really gothic, some of that stuff.
Yeah, and which it was, but that's how I treated it. So I didn't go, it's not kind of pull me. It's just trying to contextualize it and contextualize that illness, the mental issues, contextualize it. So some of the things are quite funny. I would say it's more pathos than being upsetting. And that's genuinely how I am, because I choose not to look back. I don't blame my parents for anything. I just choose to look at all the positive things they gave me, of which there were so many. And yeah.
In the spirit of humour, give me a Princess Margaret anecdote. I love her. I loved her before, but I loved her even more after I finished the book.
I mean, Princess Margaret came into my life at the right time, because my mum was really at the height of her illness before she got dementia. And Princess Margaret was just, her warmth and her empathy and her brilliant mind and her sense of humor. And she was, I think when your first kind of love in your 20s, when you're leaving childhood behind and you're breaking away from the nest, you automatically look for somewhere else to lay your head. And mine just happened to be in a bedroom at Princess Margaret's house. And so it's almost like you look for another parent that isn't your parent, and she became that. But I could be so open and honest with her. It just didn't matter at all. So there was this instant in every summer she would do these sort of tours around London, and we were at the Maritime Museum in Greenwich, and we'd had lunch. It was in the middle of lunch, and I really needed to have a poo. So I kind of disappeared, and I've been gone for rather a long time because I couldn't get, it sounds so gross, but, I was trying to flush the loo and it wouldn't go down. Anyway, she came.
Nightmare.
Yeah, she came to find me, and I was sort of still sitting on the loo, and she said, "Susannah, are you all right? Where are you?" A bit cross. I'd left the table for so long. And I just said, "Ma'am, it just, it won't go down. I don't know what to do." And she said, "Go and get a knife." So off I trotted. And I found a nice kind of silver cake slice, cake knife. And I thought, okay, that'll do. And I put it up my sleeve, and I went back, and she just took the knife off me, went to the loo and chopped it up with the cake knife so it would go down. And that was her. She was
very practical.
Well, she was so practical. She was so resourceful. She was not embarrassed by anything. And by token, I wasn't embarrassed by anything. So I could tell her anything, knowing I wouldn't be judged. I miss her. I miss her. And I feel one of my regrets is that I didn't stay in touch with her, because I didn't feel it was appropriate, and
not straightforward, is it really?
Not straightforward, but she did, having not seen her for 3 to 5 years, and I got engaged to Steen. I hadn't seen her, I hadn't spoken to her. I got a call out of the blue, and she'd organised a dinner to celebrate our engagement. What ex-boyfriend's mother does that? Forget it's someone like Princess Margaret. How unbelievably generous and loving and incredible is that? She was a fucking great woman. I really, really loved her.
Yeah, she just absolutely comes across as amazing. But it's so interesting, isn't it? Because her public image and, public images are invariably entirely wrong. Was that she was quite, well, although this isn't inconsistent with what you're saying, that she just didn't suffer a fall for a nanosecond.
No, she hated yes men. She hated sycophants. And, she could be imperious, but she didn't care. She knew the people who she could trust, and she surrounded herself with the people she could trust. And the public perception was different to the person I knew. I saw her. I was very lucky to have seen a side to her, which was outside her own children, was incredibly maternal. And I think that is a unique perspective to have had.
Okay, before I go on to the questions that I always ask at the end, which I know you will have swatted up on.
I don't think I have, actually, because I felt I'm not being rude, but I always listen to podcasts when I go to sleep, and then
you fell asleep at the end.
I think, yeah. So I don't know what the questions are.
I'll take that as, I don't know. I'll take that.
It's just honest.
Yeah. But first, I want to talk to you about menopause. So, in amongst all this stuff was going on, so your mother died, you were in AA, Trinny and Susannah had finished. Where was menopause in all this? I've got the sun in my face. Sorry, squinting.
You sure have. Menopause. I didn't go through any of the physical symptoms of menopause. I was very lucky to have had nothing as far as I was aware, but I definitely had mental menopause, which coincided with the demise of Trinny and Susannah. And for sure, I think that contributed to my drinking. It certainly, I was very lost. Trinny and Susannah wasn't Trinny and Susannah anymore. It was Trinny and Susannah. We were always an item. But it happened overnight, pretty much. And that, having spent 15 years being part of a team, part of a duo, it's like losing, it was like a death. And then the kind of anxiousness and all of that, but physically I had no, looking back, I didn't think, oh, it's the menopause. I never once thought that. I've been very fortunate, but menopause hasn't really, it's not something I've given a lot of thought to, because I don't believe I've really been through it. I mean, I have, clearly, because I haven't had my period for fuck knows how long. But
I don't miss them, do you?
Not at all.
No, it's like,
no. Yes. I know, not at all. It's such a relief, isn't it?
Oh, thank God, yeah.
No clitty litter. It's just, you can wear the same pair of pants the next day.
Yeah. But it really made me laugh when you talked about the, I can't remember how you put it, because I always call it the flesh duvet, and I think you called it like being covered with 7 togs of the body changes.
Like, yes.
Oh, man.
Oh, and the little pigeon sitting. Yeah, it's like a belt round a duvet. Oh my God, that photograph. Yes. So yes, the weight was, but I think also that coincided with stopping drinking and supplementing it with huge amounts of sugar.
Yes, because of course you're not getting sugar, are you?
You're not getting the sugar.
So
but most people lose weight. Men lose weight when they stop drinking, and women fucking put it on. It's so unfair.
Yeah, then much less away. I had stopped drinking when I got long COVID, just because I can't drink anymore.
Oh, you poor thing.
I thought I would lose loads of weight. No, because I suddenly started eating chocolate, and I couldn't work out where that came from. But obviously, it came from the lack of sugar. I know. I never did get biology O level.
No, me neither. But why am I so huge? But yeah, there are so many stages, aren't there, in a woman and girl's life? So many stages that we have to get through and overcome and move on from. And menopause is hopefully the last.
So you were part of a duo. You were Trinny and Susannah for such a long time. Who is Susannah?
Susannah was the one that people identified with. And I think Trinny was the one people aspired to be. And I was always known as the fat one. And it was like the fat one, which is fine. People always say to me when we doing book signings or something, oh my God, you're so much smaller in real life. I think I was, Trinny will say this, that I was the one with sense of humor, was funnier maybe. And I think that for me it was less about the clothes and more about the connection, the emotional connection with people. I wasn't really so interested in the clothes, except for the, how they were actually made and whether the zip was placed properly and hidden and whether it was sunray pleats or box pleats. So I looked at the sort of the way clothes were made. But I didn't really, it was much more about making that connection with people.
And how is that manifest now?
A lot of that time it was a performance, actually, because I don't think being on television wasn't, it seemed natural, and I was completely, we were both completely ourselves doing that, making that show. But I think that it's like, when you put aside your addiction, you return to the person you were when you first started. And I'm an introvert. I'm not someone who likes being surrounded by people. I find it exhausting. I find it, for me, I have to put on a performance, and it's really fucking tiring. And I think that's another reason I probably drank, because it's not my natural state. So, the person now is someone who loves solitude, loves isolation, hates crowds, doesn't like socializing unless it's in small groups, is, a housewife and a mother living in the countryside, not too worried about her appearance, keeping healthy, keeping fit, and continuing to overlove people, suffocate people with love.
We're back to the bear.
Yeah, we're back to the bear, the teddy bear.
Right. What's your emotional age?
Oh, I would say probably about 16 to 18.
Why is that?
Because I hate responsibility. I hate being accountable for anything. And I think those are the two main reasons. But I'm learning to, try and be a bit more responsible about various things. I just find I hate being accountable. I'm not someone who takes responsibility. I'd always far rather someone else took responsibility for things. And I might even lean on my children to do that. I think sometimes they're more grown up than I am.
Give me a book recommendation, a book. It could be something that you've always loved, that's always had an impact on you, or could just be something really good that you read last week. I
read and read and read and read and read, and I always have. But the one I really loved was In Extremis, about the life of Marie Colvin, war correspondent with her eye patch. That's such a wonderful book. And she was an alcoholic. It is such a wonderful book because I love the Middle East. I love Israel. I love that part of the world so much. So I found that fascinating. And also there's another one called High Risk by Ben Timberlake. I was blown away by that book. Cannot recommend it highly enough.
What advice would you give younger women?
Accept the things you can't change. There's no point worrying about things you can't change. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy. I tell my children, when they get their knickers in a twist about exams or things in the future, I said, look, you might get run over by a bus tomorrow and you're spending the whole of today worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. It's a waste of time.
Who's your old bird role model?
I guess Sheila Hancock. I love her, and she's just feisty as hell, and she surrounds herself by younger people who adore her, and she's become something. She's so much more than an elderly lady. She's this huge personality who continues to live life to the full.
Yeah, she is amazing. What's your superpower?
Empathy.
Hard one.
I think that's my superpower, knowing what people are thinking and feeling.
And how many fucks do you give?
Oh, not very many. I really don't give many fucks at all about most things. But if they concern myself, I don't give a fuck about anything. What you see is what you get. Yeah, but I do give a fuck about this book, and it's the first work thing that I've ever really given a fuck about.
That's really good. You just ruined my last extra question, which was going to be, what would the Susannah who was brought up to be not really ready for anything think about having written this book?
She'd read it and not realise it's about herself, but think it was very entertaining and very funny, irrespective of who it's written by.
She'd be proud of you.
She'd be very proud of me, yeah, she would. She think you do have a brain.
Yeah, so do. See, Dad? See?
Yeah.
Thank you, Susannah. That was brilliant. Thank you for being so candid.
Oh, you're amazing, Sam. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Take care,
my love. Have a lovely weekend, Sam.
And you. Okay.
Lots of love.
Thank you for listening. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate, review and follow, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like to support The Shift further, please consider becoming a member of our community. Find out more at steady.media/The Shift.